Welcome back to Slumber Lore. Tonight, we resume our long, peaceful journey along the ancient paths of the Silk Road. We leave the snowy mountain passes behind and travel deeper into the heart of distant empires. Let the steady rhythm of the rain and the warm crackle of our campfire comfort you. Find your resting place, close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath, and let the echoes of ancient caravans carry you into a deep, unbroken sleep. Empires in the middle and the price of passage. After the mountains, the world begins to breathe differently. The valleys widen into fertile plains. Rivers nourish fields instead of dry ravines, and the road no longer feels like a struggle against nature alone. A new chapter of the Silk Roads is about to unfold. Unlike the fragile oasis towns, these cities project confidence. Strong walls, guarded entrances, and busy warehouses reveal places where trade has become part of political authority and where every arriving caravan represents both opportunity and revenue. In the marketplace, many languages blend together. Merchants bargain over spices, silk, and precious metals, while officials quietly record agreements. Here, commerce becomes more than survival. It becomes an instrument of administration, taxation, and political influence. These middle lands ask a different question than the desert ever did. The challenge is no longer only survival, it is permission. Before a caravan may enter, documents are presented, taxes considered, and authority quietly reminds every traveler that trade now moves through the hands of empires. Between the eastern Silk Roads and the Mediterranean stretched a vast middle world. Regions such as Bactria, Sogdiana, the Iranian Plateau, and northern India formed the political and commercial heart of Eurasian exchange for many centuries. Bactria stood at the crossroads of several civilizations. Once part of the Persian Empire, it later absorbed powerful Hellenistic influences after Alexander's campaigns, becoming a region where political traditions and artistic ideas blended in remarkable ways. The Kushan Empire became one of the great powers of the Silk Roads. Its territory linked Central Asia with northern India, encouraging trade, supporting religious communities, and connecting cultures that had once seemed separated by enormous distances. Farther west, the Parthian Empire shaped the movement of goods and diplomacy across the Iranian world. These middle powers did more than permit trade. They protected routes, collected revenue, and influenced how people, merchandise, and ideas moved across Eurasia. As the caravan enters these powerful cities, the atmosphere changes. This is no longer simply a place to rest. Every arrival is observed, every shipment matters, and the authority of the state is visible in every gate, guard, and official. A caravan does not simply pass through these gates. Its leader announces the journey, presents letters of recommendation, and earns permission to continue. Sometimes diplomacy begins with a gift whose purpose everyone understands, even if nobody calls it by the same name. Inside the warehouses, trade becomes highly organized. Some goods are unpacked for local buyers, while others remain carefully sealed for destinations farther west. Every bundle represents investment, trust, and the expectation that the next stage of the journey will succeed. Coins become one of the strongest symbols of imperial authority. More than simple payment, they carry royal portraits, sacred imagery, and official inscriptions, reminding every traveler whose laws, protection, and taxation shape the marketplace around them. The Kushan world stood at one of the greatest crossroads of Eurasia. Goods from India, Central Asia, Persia, and China met in the same marketplaces, where merchants exchanged not only valuable products but also ideas, customs, and practical knowledge. As Buddhism gained support in parts of the Kushan Empire, monasteries became more than religious centers. They offered hospitality, literacy, and safe places where travelers could rest, learn, and prepare for the next stage of their journey. Not every merchant shared the same language, yet trade continued through patience and cooperation. Interpreters, gestures, trusted measurements, and mutual experience allowed agreements to emerge even when words alone were not enough. Empires changed, rulers came and went, and trade adapted with them. One city could flourish under stable government while another declined after shifting taxes or weakened protection. Along the Silk Roads, merchants learned that flexibility was often the greatest form of security. Coins are among the strongest pieces of evidence for understanding these middle empires. Their portraits, inscriptions, and symbols help historians trace political authority, economic activity, and the remarkable cultural diversity that shaped the Silk Roads. The Rabatak inscription is one of the most important written sources for Kushan history. It provides valuable clues about royal authority, language, and political ambition, giving scholars a firmer foundation for understanding one of the Silk Road's greatest empires. The discoveries at Bigram reveal an extraordinary mixture of luxury goods from many regions. Glass linked to the Mediterranean, Indian craftsmanship, and Central Asian trade all appear together, illustrating how interconnected these middle lands had become. Historians continue to debate how trade actually moved across Eurasia. Some evidence suggests that a few merchants traveled extraordinary distances, while much of the network probably relied on staged exchange, with goods changing hands repeatedly between regional specialists. Not every valuable object traveled as merchandise. Some luxuries arrived as diplomatic gifts, tribute, or symbols of political friendship. Their purpose was not simply economic, but to strengthen relationships between rulers and demonstrate prestige. Scholars continue to debate how governments viewed long-distance trade. Some rulers actively encouraged commerce by protecting roads and investing in infrastructure, while others focused more heavily on collecting taxes from merchants already using established roads. Political conditions could quickly reshape the map of the Silk Roads. Changes in taxation, security, or regional alliances often encouraged caravans to choose different routes, proving that successful trade depended as much on political judgment as geographical knowledge. Objects often lived more than one life. A treasure presented as a diplomatic gift could later become a traded commodity or a family heirloom. Along the Silk Roads, goods carried changing meanings as they moved between courts, markets, and households. Modern historians emphasize that Central Asia was never merely a bridge between East and West. Its cities developed sophisticated governments, thriving economies, and vibrant cultural traditions that shaped the Silk Roads in their own right. Numismatists often reconstruct history through coins, their dates, inscriptions, royal portraits, and religious symbols reveal changing political authority while offering one of the most reliable timelines available for understanding the Silk Roads. Art historians often point to Gandhara as an extraordinary example of cultural adaptation. Rather than simply copying foreign styles, local artists blended Hellenistic techniques with Buddhist themes to create a visual language that was both familiar and entirely new. Scholars of religion remind us that trade often encouraged patronage. Prosperous merchants financed monasteries, temples, and public works, while those institutions offered hospitality, literacy, and trusted networks that supported travelers throughout the Silk Roads. Not every exchange involved money or merchandise. A new craft technique, a better method of weighing goods, or a practical skill learned in conversation could spread from one workshop to another without ever appearing in an official record. Many of history's most meaningful exchanges may have happened in ordinary conversations. A shared meal, a story from a distant homeland, or practical advice offered to a stranger could influence lives without leaving any physical evidence behind. Most of the people who shaped the Silk Roads never entered history by name. Their work survives only through scattered traces reminding us that great historical networks were built by thousands of ordinary individuals whose stories are now largely forgotten. The greatest mysteries of the Silk Roads may never be answered completely. Some agreements were never written down, some journeys left no trace, and some conversations changed lives without changing histories survive in documents. Yet together, those unseen moments help shape the connected world that followed. As night settles over the city, trade finally pauses for a few quiet hours. Coins are counted, records are rolled away, and experienced merchants listen as carefully as they bargain, knowing that awareness is often the greatest form of protection. Beyond the walls, the roads continue toward lands where new empires, new languages, and new ambitions await. Every successful caravan carries more than merchandise. It carries expectations, rumors, and opportunities into worlds still unseen. By now, the Silk Roads reveal a deeper truth. Trade was never only about buying and selling. Commerce, diplomacy, taxation, and political authority became tightly connected, shaping one another across centuries of interaction. The journey now turns toward the Western empires. In the next chapter, we will follow silk beyond the Iranian world into the imagination of Rome, where a distant fabric became a symbol of wealth, controversy, and the mysterious lands that produced it. Before sunrise, the city grows quiet once more. Coins have been counted, agreements have been sealed, and another caravan prepares to leave. The business of empire pauses only briefly before the roads begin moving in again. The Middle Empires were never empty spaces between greater civilizations. They were the living heart of the Silk Roads, shaping commerce, diplomacy, religion, and culture, while connecting distant societies through their own ambitions and institutions. The roads now lead farther west into the Iranian world, where powerful states influence every stage of the journey. Here, commerce becomes increasingly tied to diplomacy, taxation, and the careful management of strategic frontiers. In the next episode, the Silk Roads enter the orbit of Rome. There, a fabric from the distant east becomes an object of fascination, debate, and desire, revealing how trade could reshape not only economies, but also imagination itself. Rome's hunger for silk and the middlemen of the West. You have traveled far from the desert oasis, yet distance still shapes the world around you. Here, beside the calm waters of a Roman harbor, commerce continues long after sunset, connecting lands that most people will never see with their own eyes. In a quiet storeroom, a wooden chest is opened with great care. Inside rests an astonishing fabric, so light and smooth that it almost seems impossible. For those who have known only wool and linen, silk feels like something beyond ordinary experience. The fabric catches the lamplight with an almost unreal softness. Hands hesitate before touching it, as though they are handling something too delicate for the ordinary world. In that moment, silk becomes more than cloth. It becomes a symbol of unimaginable distance. Someone softly speaks a single word, silk. To many Romans, it sounded almost like the name of a distant land rather than a material. The fabric carried not only beauty, but also the mystery of places that few people could ever hope to reach. As valuable goods moved westward, they gradually entered the economic world of the Mediterranean. Every stage of the journey connected another community, until products that began thousands of kilometers away eventually reached Roman markets and wealthy households. Roman writers often describe silk as coming from a distant people known as the Ceres. Their knowledge of the Far East was incomplete, shaped by travelers and intermediaries whose stories changed as they passed from one region to another. Between Rome and the eastern producers stood powerful intermediary states such as the Parthian Empire. These kingdoms managed trade routes, collected taxes, and benefited from controlling the movement of valuable goods across their territories. The Silk Roads did not connect Rome and China through one uninterrupted conversation. Instead, information and merchandise moved from hand to hand across many regions, changing slightly with every exchange until they reached consumers far from their place of origin. Imagine the western end of the network not as a single destination, but as a chain of connected markets. Caravans arrive, cargo is inspected, taxes are paid, and valuable goods begin another stage of their long journey toward the the Mediterranean. Once Eastern goods reached the Mediterranean, the sea became another extension of the Silk Roads. Merchant ships carried luxury products from one port to another, spreading them through the Roman economy with remarkable efficiency for the ancient world. In prosperous Roman cities, imported luxuries became symbols of refinement and status. Markets serving wealthy families displayed goods from across the known world, each object carrying a history that stretched far beyond the empire's borders. Among all imported luxuries, silk held a special place. Its remarkable softness and brilliant sheen immediately set it apart from familiar fabrics, making it one of the clearest visible signs that wealth could reach across continents. For many wealthy Romans, silk became a symbol of status. Wearing it announced not only prosperity, but also a family's ability to reach across the world through commerce, diplomacy, and carefully cultivated connections. Yet, not everyone welcomed this new luxury. Roman moralists worried that silk was too expensive, too foreign, and too indulgent. To them, imported extravagance seemed to threaten discipline, drain wealth, and reshape the values of traditional society. Silk created a quiet cultural tension. Younger citizens found beauty in it, while older voices feared its influence. Debates about luxury, identity, and imported taste were not new, but silk gave them a striking and unmistakable focus. While philosophers debated luxury, trade continued through countless ordinary decisions. Merchants weighed profits, lenders offered credit, and buyers accepted risk. The Silk Roads were shaped as much by everyday economic choices as by empires or ideas. The silk that reached Roman markets rarely traveled with a single merchant from beginning to end. Instead, it passed through many hands, gaining new value and new stories with every exchange across deserts, mountains, kingdoms, and ports. When someone wore silk in the Roman world, they also carried an invisible history. Hidden within the fabric were the deserts crossed, the mountains climbed, the merchants trusted, and the countless exchanges that made such luxury possible. Much of what we know about Roman attitudes towards silk comes from writers such as Pliny the Elder. Their works provide valuable evidence, yet they also reflect personal opinions and moral concerns, rather than objective records of everyday commerce. Archaeology complements the written record. Silk fragments, imported luxury objects, and carefully furnished burials confirm that Eastern goods reached the Roman world, even though fragile textiles survive only under especially favorable conditions. One long-standing interpretation argues that intermediary powers, especially the Parthian Empire, during certain periods benefited greatly from controlling caravan routes. Their position allowed them to profit from trade while shaping how goods and information move between distant regions. Another interpretation emphasizes flexibility rather than monopoly. Alongside overland caravans, maritime trade through the Red Sea and Indian Ocean connected Roman Egypt with South Asia, creating multiple pathways through which Eastern goods could eventually reach Mediterranean markets. Historians also debate how common silk truly became in Roman society. Some believe it remained an exclusive luxury reserved for elites, while others suggest that silk and silk blends gradually became more visible as long-distance trade expanded over time. Whatever its quantity, silk carried extraordinary meaning. It represented distance made wearable, a material that allowed people to hold, display, and imagine connections with lands so distant that many believed they belonged almost to legend. Economic historians point out that ancient long-distance trade favored goods with exceptional value relative to their size. Silk perfectly matched that pattern, making it worth the enormous expense and risk required to transport it across continents. Ancient Roman knowledge of the Far East was limited and indirect. Places such as the land of the Ceres were understood through travelers' reports, making distant societies seem both real and mysterious at the same time. Modern historians emphasize that intermediary empires were never passive corridors. States such as Parthia shaped trade through taxation, diplomacy, and political negotiation, turning strategic geography into lasting economic influence. Cultural historians remind us that silk was more than a valuable fabric. It became part of larger conversations about identity, morality, status, and taste, revealing how a single material could reshape the way an entire society thought about luxury and the wider world. Historians still debate how often truly direct diplomatic contact occurred between the far ends of Eurasia. Ancient sources describe embassies and distant peoples, but separating formal diplomacy from commercial missions or misunderstood encounters is not always possible. Many of the people who connected East and West remain almost invisible in history. Brokers, translators, financiers, and customs officials rarely became famous. Yet, without their daily work, the great networks of long-distance exchange could not have functioned. Not every exchange appeared in official records. Countless transactions likely took place in small frontier markets, leaving little archaeological evidence and almost no written documentation for historians to study today. Perhaps the most difficult cargo to measure was imagination itself. Every merchant's story, every rumor, and every tale about distant lands may have increased the value of silk, making mystery an invisible part of the price people were willing to pay. As night settles over the market, the silk is folded away once more. Hidden inside its wooden chest, it remains more than a luxury object. It preserves the memory of a journey stretching across deserts, mountains, ports, and countless unseen hands. Even as one city falls asleep, the Silk Roads remain awake elsewhere. Caravans continue through the night. Ships cross dark waters. Scholars copy manuscripts, and translators search patiently for words that can carry ideas across cultures. The Silk Roads carried far more than luxury goods. Alongside fabrics and precious objects traveled beliefs, stories, music, artistic traditions, and new ways of understanding the world, often changing societies without anyone recognizing transformation at first. In the next chapter, we follow the most delicate cargo of all. Religions and ideas traveled with merchants and pilgrims across the Silk Roads, leaving lasting marks in manuscripts, sacred art, and places of worship that still speak quietly across the centuries. The chest closes, and the silk disappears from view, yet its journey is far from over. Even when hidden away, it continues to carry the memory of every caravan, every negotiation, and every landscape that made its arrival possible. By this point, the Silk Roads reveal themselves as something greater than a trade route. They become a network of human choices linking deserts, mountains, seas, and cities through cooperation, negotiation, and the steady movement of people across generations. Every traveler carried something beyond material goods. Some transported knowledge, others carried languages, faith, or practical experience. Together, these countless individual journeys created one of history's most remarkable networks of cultural exchange. The next stage of the Silk Roads follows an even more enduring kind of exchange. Beyond luxury goods lay the movement of beliefs, philosophies, and sacred texts carried by pilgrims, teachers, and merchants whose ideas would reshape societies across Eurasia for centuries. Before dawn, the harbor grows quiet once again. The silk rests inside its chest, but the network that carried it never truly sleeps. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another caravan is already moving, beginning the next chapter of an ancient exchange. The Silk Roads were never sustained by commerce alone. Every road also carried languages, beliefs, music, memories, and stories. The exchange of ideas often traveled beside luxury goods, leaving changes that outlasted the objects themselves. Along these roads, merchants and pilgrims often traveled side by side, as caravans carried silk, spices, and precious goods. They also carried sacred writings, songs, rituals, and new ways of understanding the world across remarkable distances. In the next episode, the Silk Roads become pathways for belief as much as trade. We will follow Buddhism, Manichaeism, the Church of the East, and other traditions as they cross deserts and mountains, shaping civilizations through manuscripts, art, and quiet acts of devotion that endured long after caravans had passed. The most delicate cargo, faith on the move. Night in an oasis town is never completely silent. Even after the market closes, life continues quietly behind closed doors. A kettle cools, a door is fastened, and somewhere a small lamp burns, while the desert waits patiently beyond the walls. Walking slowly through these darkened streets, you notice something easy to overlook. A modest building stands quietly among ordinary homes, unremarkable from the outside, yet clearly built for a purpose different from trade or shelter. Inside, the air feels different. Travelers pray in quiet devotion, reciting words first spoken in distant lands among people who could never have imagined this desert town. Yet here, far from their origin, those words are repeated with sincerity. No empire commanded these prayers, and no map required them. Ideas simply followed the roads that people traveled. passing from one life to another. Tonight, we follow the Silk Roads not through silk or coin, but through belief itself. The Silk Roads carried religions across Eurasia for centuries, not as one single wave, but as many overlapping journeys. Beliefs moved with merchants, monks, missionaries, families, and translators, adapting slowly as they passed through towns, empires, and languages. Buddhism began in South Asia, but it traveled north and east through Central Asia into China and beyond. Monks carried teachings, merchants supported monasteries, and translators helped foreign scriptures become meaningful in new cultural worlds. Manichaeism, founded by Mani in the Iranian world during the 3rd century, also moved widely along the Silk Roads. Its strong missionary tradition and written teachings found receptive audiences in multilingual trading communities across Central Asia and China. Other traditions also moved through these routes. The Church of the East established communities deep into Asia, while Zoroastrian practices shaped Iranian and diaspora life. Later, Islam would profoundly reshape Central Asia, adding another powerful layer to the religious landscape. Imagine traveling beside a caravan where every day is shaped by water, wind, and distance. Yet when evening comes and the work is finished, practical concerns slowly give way to quieter questions about purpose, hope, and the meaning of the journey itself. In the quiet of a caravanserai, faith appears in small, ordinary moments. A monk arranges his bowl, a traveler whispers a familiar prayer, and another lights a lamp before sleep. No one is compelled to believe, yet many find comfort in practices that make uncertainty feel a little less overwhelming. Along the Silk Roads, monasteries often served many purposes at once. They were places of worship, but also centers of hospitality, learning, translation, and practical care, offering travelers safety as well as spiritual guidance. Translation became one of the greatest acts of cultural exchange. Patient scholars worked line by line, turning unfamiliar words into meaningful ideas. Through their efforts, beliefs crossed linguistic boundaries as successfully as caravans crossed deserts and mountains. Manichaeism spread in a different way from many other traditions. Its communities placed a great importance on teaching and written texts, allowing its ideas to travel efficiently through multilingual trading centers connected by the Silk Roads. The Church of the East established communities across Central Asia and beyond. Merchants carried more than goods between them. Letters shared its traditions, and regular contact strengthened religious networks that stretched across remarkable distances. Religious ideas also transformed art. Sacred figures gradually took on local styles, colors, and artistic traditions. Rather than remaining unchanged, beliefs adapted visually as they entered new cultural landscapes along the Silk Roads. Life along the Silk Roads was often layered rather than uniform. Different traditions sometimes lived peacefully beside one another, while families combined old customs with new beliefs. Religious identity was often more complex than a single label could express. When night settled across the caravan, practical concerns slowly gave way to deeper questions. Travelers thought about protection, purpose, and the uncertain future. Far from home, even a familiar prayer or shared story could become a source of remarkable comfort. As merchants settled in distant cities, faith became part of family life. Children learned tradition from their parents while also absorbing local customs, creating communities where identity slowly evolved through everyday experience rather than sudden change. Every translation involved careful choices. Words carried assumptions shaped by one culture and had to become meaningful in another. Through this patient work, religious ideas gradually crossed linguistic boundaries without losing their essential purpose. The Silk Roads carried far more than commercial wealth. Alongside every caravan traveled beliefs, stories, rituals, and questions about life itself. In many ways, these invisible forms of exchange proved even more enduring than the precious goods carried on the backs of animals. Some of the strongest evidence for religious life comes from surviving manuscripts, collections discovered at places such as Dunhuang preserve Buddhist, Manichaean, and Christian writings, revealing organized communities devoted to teaching, copying, and preserving sacred knowledge. Architecture and art tell another part of the story. Temples, monasteries, churches, murals, and carved symbols reveal how different traditions established lasting communities while adapting their appearance to local cultures and environments. The Xi'an stele offers remarkable evidence of Christianity in Tang, China. Its inscription explains Christian beliefs using concepts familiar to Chinese readers, showing how religious communities often adapted their language while preserving their core traditions. Historians continue to debate how religion spread most effectively. Merchant networks, missionary efforts, and political patronage all played important roles, and their influence varied across different regions and different centuries of Silk Road history. Some scholars emphasize the remarkable blending of cultures along the Silk Roads, while others remind us that different communities also maintained clear religious boundaries. Coexistence did not always mean complete agreement, and diversity often included both cooperation and difference. Adaptation and preservation often happen at the same time. Artistic styles could travel freely between cultures, yet many communities remain committed to their own rituals, teachings, and traditions, maintaining identities even while living beside people of different beliefs. Archaeological discoveries must be interpreted carefully. A large monastery or richly decorated temple may reflect generous patronage by rulers or wealthy donors, but it does not necessarily tell us how many ordinary people followed that tradition in everyday life. Every surviving manuscript, inscription, or temple represents only part of a larger story. Historians must balance written evidence with archaeology, remembering that what survives is often only a small fraction of the lives once lived along the Silk Roads. Many historians describe religious transmission as a network rather than a straight line. Monasteries, caravan towns, and trading communities formed connected centers where ideas could pause, grow, and continue their journey across Eurasia. Translation required far more than replacing one word with another. Every sentence carried cultural assumptions and symbolic meanings. Careful choices by translators helped unfamiliar beliefs become understandable in completely different societies. Art often crossed borders more easily than doctrine. A painted image or decorative pattern could travel between cultures long before its deeper meaning was fully understood, making visual expression one of history's quietest forms of cultural exchange. Religious communities often depended on political circumstances. During periods of tolerance, institutions expanded and welcomed new followers. At other times, changing governments forced communities to adapt, migrate, or continue their traditions more quietly. Historians still know surprisingly little about everyday religious life. We cannot say with confidence how many people practiced their faith regularly, how many participated only occasionally, or how many simply lived comfortably alongside several traditions. Conversion rarely follow a single path. Marriage, friendship, healing, generosity, personal crisis, or quiet admiration may all have influenced how people adopted new beliefs. Most of these deeply personal experiences left little trace for historians to recover. The role of women in religious transmission remains difficult to reconstruct. Yet, within homes and communities, they likely passed on stories, songs, rituals, and values that shaped the beliefs of future generations in ways written records seldom describe. Not every belief traveled on paper. Songs, stories, prayers, and spoken teachings may have carried ideas across the Silk Roads just as effectively as written manuscripts. Their influence was profound, even though much of it has vanished without leaving lasting physical evidence. The little place of worship grows quiet again. No crowds gather, no great ceremony unfolds, yet its presence reminds us that belief often travels through ordinary lives rather than dramatic moments remembered by history. The Silk Roads carried more than things people wanted. They also carried what people needed: hope, community, moral guidance, and ways of making sense of uncertainty. These invisible forms of exchange often lasted longer than the goods themselves. Yet every network carries more than its intended cargo. Alongside sacred texts and valuable knowledge traveled rumors, technologies, unfamiliar customs, and sometimes even unseen dangers. Connection has always brought both opportunity and consequence. In the next chapter, we follow another remarkable cargo carried by the Silk Roads: knowledge, technology, paper, medicine, and scientific ideas traveled beside merchants, changing civilizations in ways that were often invisible until generations later. Before sunrise, the town begins to wake once again. The prayers have ended, but the journey continues. Faith does not remain behind in the temple. It travels with the people who carry it into another day on the road. The Silk Roads remind us that ideas move much like people do. They pause, change direction, find new companions, and gradually adapt to unfamiliar places. Every traveler carries more than possessions, leaving behind traces that no inventory can fully record. As the caravan leaves the oasis, another kind of journey begins. Beyond belief itself lie the practical ideas that transform civilizations: paper, medicine, astronomy, engineering, and the quiet exchange of knowledge from one generation to the next. In the next episode, we will follow the movement of knowledge itself along the same roads that carried silk and faith, traveled paper, scientific ideas, medical traditions, and innovations that reshape societies along with unintended consequences that no traveler could fully foresee. Paper, stars, and unseen passengers. Across many centuries, one quiet scene repeats itself. A traveler arrives after nightfall, not at a palace or a temple, but at a modest room where a single lamp burns softly beside ink and waiting manuscripts. The traveler unfolds something remarkable. It is not bamboo, parchment, or silk, but paper, light enough to carry easily, strong enough to preserve words, and practical enough to transform the way knowledge moves across the world. The brush meets the paper, and a single line of ink quietly appears. In that simple moment, ideas become portable. Distance itself begins to shrink, carried not only by memory, but by words that can travel far beyond the voice that first spoke them. The Silk Roads carried more than objects that could be counted or weighed. They carried methods, knowledge, and new ways of understanding the world. They also carried consequences, some welcomed with excitement, and others arriving quietly, unseen until much later. Long before modern communication, the Silk Roads carried more than commercial goods. They connected distant societies through practical knowledge, teaching new ways to write, calculate, heal, navigate, and preserve information across remarkable distances. Paper making began in China centuries before it spread farther west. This remarkable invention offered a lighter, more practical writing surface, making the recording and sharing of knowledge easier than ever before in the ancient world. Paper was only one part of a much larger exchange. Astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and practical technologies also traveled with merchants, monks, and scholars, gradually transforming the intellectual life of societies across Eurasia. Every network carries both opportunity and risk. The same roads that spread paper, science, and medicine also allow diseases to move between distant populations. Greater connection brought remarkable progress, but it also created new forms of vulnerability. Imagine a merchant who records more than profits. Every agreement, delivery, and promise must be remembered. Reliable records help protect both reputation and business, especially when journeys last for months, and trust must survive across enormous distances. Earlier records relied on wood, bamboo, parchment, or memory itself. Paper gradually changed that experience. It was lighter to carry, easier to store, and simpler to copy, allowing written information to travel farther with less effort. As paper became more common, the entire network changed. Administrators kept better records. Merchants carried more correspondence. Monasteries copied texts more efficiently, and written agreements became practical companions for long-distance trade. Writing itself became part of the marketplace. Ink, brushes, paper, and seals were valuable tools of everyday commerce, supporting contracts, letters, and official documents that gave merchants greater confidence as the Silk Roads continued to expand. Wherever travelers looked up, they saw the same stars, yet different cultures interpreted the heavens in different ways. Astronomical knowledge moved along the Silk Roads as scholars compared observations, calendars, and methods of measuring the sky. As ideas traveled, they were rarely accepted without discussion. Scholars compared foreign calculations with local traditions, debated competing explanations, and gradually adapted useful knowledge into their own intellectual traditions. Medicine also crossed cultural boundaries. Healers learned about unfamiliar plants, merchants transported valuable ingredients, and written texts preserved treatments that could travel far beyond the communities where they first developed. Most evenings passed peacefully. Travelers shared food, stories, and shelter before continuing their journeys. Yet the same closeness that strengthened communities also created opportunities for unseen illnesses to move quietly from one place to another. Most journeys ended without incident, yet occasionally an illness appeared weeks after travelers arrived. At first, it looked like ordinary misfortune. Only later, as more people became sick, did communities begin to recognize that something larger might be unfolding. People explained disease using the knowledge available to them. Some relied on herbal medicine, careful isolation, or cleaner water. Others turned to ritual, prayer, or beliefs about unseen forces, hoping to restore balance in uncertain times. The same roads that carried on knowledge also carried vulnerability. Increased connection allowed remarkable discoveries to spread, but it also meant that distant communities became more closely linked through both opportunity and unexpected risk. The Silk Roads transformed the ancient world because they connected people on an unprecedented scale. Every new connection created possibilities for learning, commerce, and cooperation, while also reminding humanity that every advantage carries responsibilities as well as risks. The Battle of Talas is often linked to the westward spread of papermaking. According to later traditions, captured Chinese papermakers introduced their craft farther west. Historians continue to debate how decisive this single event actually was. Most researchers now believe that papermaking spread through several channels over time rather than one dramatic moment. As the craft reached Central Asia and the Islamic world, local communities adapted it to their own materials, needs, and traditions. The movement of scientific and medical knowledge is often difficult to trace precisely. Historians can identify translated texts and share the terminology, but determining exactly how a particular technique spread from one region to another remains a challenging puzzle. Understanding ancient disease is especially difficult. Written records often lack precise medical details, so archaeologists and paleogenetic researchers combine historical evidence with ancient DNA to better understand how some epidemics may have spread across connected populations. Historians no longer see the movement of ideas or disease as the story of one road alone. Overland routes, rivers, and maritime networks all contributed, creating a web of connections whose paths changed over time. The historical record is shaped by the environment itself. Dry climates preserve paper and textiles that wetter regions often lose, meaning our understanding of the past depends partly on what nature allowed to survive. Modern research combines archaeology, written history, genetics, and environmental evidence. Each source contributes part of the picture, yet none can answer every question on its own. The past becomes clearer only when many forms of evidence are studied together. Connectivity is rarely a straight line. Like a web, the Silk Roads linked many different roads and communities at once. Their strength came from countless connections, but that same complexity also allowed opportunities and dangers to spread farther than anyone intended. Historians of technology emphasize that inventions rarely spread unchanged. As papermaking reached new regions, local craftspeople experimented with different raw materials, techniques, and working methods, creating traditions that reflected their own environments and practical needs. As paper became easier to produce, written knowledge expanded dramatically. More texts could be copied, more students could study, and larger archives became possible, strengthening education, administration, and intellectual life across many regions. Experts in epidemiology remind us that trade routes did not create disease. Instead, they linked distant populations more closely, allowing outbreaks to travel farther and faster than they otherwise might have. Human movement increased opportunity for transmission, but it was never the only factor involved. Paleogenetics has added an important new source of evidence by recovering ancient DNA from archaeological remains. Even so, researchers caution that preserved samples are limited, meaning each discovery offers valuable clues rather than a complete picture of the past. We still do not know exactly how many craftsmen guarded their knowledge and how many shared it freely. Some techniques may have spread through apprenticeships and curiosity, while others remained closely protected for generations before reaching new communities. Many important centers of learning have disappeared almost completely from history. Because manuscripts survive unevenly, we cannot always identify which towns served as the greatest intellectual crossroads during different centuries of the Silk Roads. Historians still cannot trace every epidemic along a single route. Disease spread depended on many interacting factors, including human travel, local environments, climate, wildlife, and maritime, as well as overland connections across Eurasia. Perhaps the greatest unknown is the ordinary people whose names have disappeared. Countless travelers lived through periods of remarkable exchange, yet history rarely preserved their stories, leaving only quiet traces beneath the roads they once followed. The lamp burns lower, and the ink slowly dries into permanence. A few simple lines, written in silence, may one day travel farther than the traveler who first placed them upon the page, carrying knowledge beyond the limits of memory alone. The Silk Roads became bridges of transformation. They carried paper, medicine, astronomy, practical skills, and new ways of thinking, gradually weaving distant societies into a more connected a more complicated world. Connection brought extraordinary possibilities, but it also carried responsibilities and consequences. The same routes that spread knowledge could also spread uncertainty, reminding us that every advance in human connection comes with challenges as well as opportunities. Ahead lies one of the most dramatic chapters in Silk Road history. Vast territories will soon be linked under a single political order, allowing merchants, envoys, and travelers to cross extraordinary distances with a speed and confidence rarely seen before. The manuscript is complete, and the lamp grows dim, yet the ideas preserved on these pages have only begun their journey. Long after the writer has gone, the words will continue traveling with caravans into distant lands. The Silk Roads carried every kind of exchange imaginable. Knowledge traveled beside commerce, curiosity traveled beside necessity, and human creativity moved with every caravan that crossed the vast landscapes of Eurasia. As the journey continues, another transformation approaches. The roads will soon pass into an age when vast territories become connected under a single political order, changing the speed, scale, and consequences of long-distance travel. In the next episode, we enter the era of the Mongol world, when unprecedented political connections reshaped the Silk Roads. Trade expanded, ideas moved faster than ever before, and the opportunities and risks of an interconnected Eurasia reached a remarkable new scale. The Mongol peace, the fast roads, and the costs of connection. A different kind of night settles over the Silk Roads. Instead of lonely silence, the darkness carries movement. Somewhere across the steppe, an imperial courier races beneath the stars, carrying a message too urgent to wait for the morning. Ahead stands a relay station where fresh horses, warm food, and official authority keep the empire connected. The rider pauses only long enough to exchange mounts before disappearing once again into the endless night. The courier carries more than a sealed message. An official tablet grants the authority to demand speed, fresh animals, and cooperation. Across the Mongol world, symbols of imperial power become tools that keep information moving without delay. Seen from above, the Silk Roads no longer resemble scattered paths. For a time, much of Eurasia becomes tied together beneath a single political system, allowing goods, travelers, letters, and ideas to move across astonishing distances with unprecedented speed. During the 13th century, the Mongol Empire expanded across much of Eurasia. What began as a steppe power gradually connected distant regions beneath one political framework, reshaping the possibilities of long-distance travel and communication. The Mongol expansion brought enormous disruption to many communities. Yet after the initial conquests, several regions experienced periods of greater political stability, allowing merchants, envoys, and travelers to move more predictably across long distances. Historians often describe this period as the Pax Mongolica, a time when many routes became easier to cross under shared systems of administration, relay stations, official protections, and predictable communication help strengthen connections across Eurasia. This era belonged to far more than famous travelers alone. Merchants, envoys, religious leaders, scholars, and skilled craftsmen all moved through the Mongol world carrying knowledge and experience alongside commercial goods. Travel under Mongol rule often began with authority made visible. Merchants presented seals, letters, and official permissions that identified who they were and where they were allowed to go. Order did not remove hardship, but it made the rules easier to understand. At relay stations, hospitality served the needs of the empire. Official couriers received fresh horses and supplies, while ordinary merchants benefited indirectly from a broader system that kept communication and movement functioning across immense distances. Life on the road remained demanding. Weather, fatigue, and illness never disappeared, and neither did every danger. Yet in many regions, merchants found the political landscape less fragmented, allowing longer journeys to become more practical than before. Faster movement brought more than valuable goods. Reliable news about politics, currencies, safe routes, and distant markets often became even more valuable than the merchandise itself, allowing merchants to make better decisions across the connected world. Not everyone traveled for commerce. Diplomatic envoys crossed enormous distances carrying official messages, negotiating alliances, resolving disputes, and representing rulers whose influence now extended across much of Eurasia. Religious figures also benefited from greater mobility. Monks, scholars, and clergy visited distant communities, sought patrons, exchanged ideas, and strengthened networks that stretched across multiple cultures under Mongol administration. The Mongol rulers valued specialized skills. Craftsmen sometimes found themselves working far from their original homes, where techniques, artistic traditions, and practical knowledge spread through daily collaboration across cultural boundaries. For centuries, many journeys had been completed one careful stage at a time. Under the Mongol Empire, longer crossings became more imaginable, allowing merchants and travelers to picture a connected Eurasia on a scale few earlier generations had experienced. Faster communication transformed commerce itself. Merchants no longer received only valuable goods. They also received timely information about markets, political changes, safe routes, and trusted currencies. Knowledge that could be even more valuable than the cargo. Ideas moved with remarkable speed. A style admired in one court could appear months later in another. New artistic techniques, luxury fashions, and practical innovations travel across the empire through the same networks that carried merchants and diplomats. The same efficiency that accelerated communication also carried hidden dangers. Rumors, political unrest, and infectious diseases could now travel more quickly between distant communities connected by expanding human movement. The Mongol era opened the doors of Eurasia wider than ever before, yet every open door admits more than welcome guests. Alongside prosperity came uncertainty, reminding us that greater connection always carries both promise and responsibility. Our understanding of the Mongol world comes from many voices rather than one famous traveler alone. Merchants, diplomats, historians, and the religious envoys each recorded different parts of the story, giving us multiple perspectives on an increasingly connected Eurasia. Administrative evidence points to a carefully managed communication network. Relay stations, official permissions, and imperial travel authority helped messages and trusted travelers move across extraordinary distances with impressive efficiency. Historians continue to debate how consistent Mongol stability truly was. Some regions enjoyed long periods of reliable travel, while others experienced changing conditions as local politics, leadership, and regional circumstances shifted over time. Another important debate concerns the balance between land and sea. While overland travel expanded during the Mongol period, maritime trade across the Indian Ocean also flourished, reminding us that the Silk Roads were always part of a much larger network of global exchange. Most historians now see overland and maritime trade as complementary rather than competing systems. Merchants selected different routes according to distance, cost, politics, the season, and the type of cargo they wished to transport. Researchers agree that greater connectivity allowed information to move more quickly. At the same time, the same human movement could contribute to the wider spread of infectious diseases, together with many environmental and ecological factors. Understanding the Mongol world requires many kinds of evidence. Historical writing, archaeology, climate studies, and genetics each contribute valuable insights, yet none can explain this complex period on its own. The Mongol era reminds us that connectivity is best understood as a web rather than a single road. Every connection strengthened the network, yet each new link also created fresh possibilities for unexpected change across distant societies. Modern historians often describe the Mongol Empire as highly pragmatic. Its rulers valued reliable communication, stable taxation, and efficient administration, adapting local expertise whenever it strengthened imperial governance across diverse regions. Many global historians describe this period as one of the clearest examples of Eurasian integration before the modern age. Greater political coordination increased the density of long-distance contact without eliminating the diversity of the regions involved. Economic historians remind us that local markets remain the foundation of everyday life. Long-distance trade carried prestigious goods across continents, but regional commerce continued to feed families, support craftsmen, and sustain ordinary communities. Environmental historians emphasize that roads alone never determine historical outcomes. Climate, harvests, animal populations, and human settlement patterns all interacted with expanding trade networks, shaping both prosperity and vulnerability across Eurasia. Even today, historians cannot measure the full volume of trade that crossed the Mongol world. Countless caravans completed successful journeys without leaving written records, while others disappeared from history before reaching their destinations. We still know surprisingly little about the daily lives of ordinary people living beside these routes. Some communities may have benefited from greater trade, while others experienced heavier taxation, official demands, or the constant presence of unfamiliar authorities. Official couriers were not the only source of information. Rumors, family connections, and conversation between travelers often spread practical knowledge more quickly than formal reports, though these informal networks are much harder for historians to reconstruct. Many stories from this era remain beyond our reach. We know little about the countless ordinary travelers who left no written testimony, whose journeys, hardships, and quiet successes helped sustain one of history's greatest networks of connection. The courier has gone, and the relay station grows quiet again. Official messages continue across the night, but for a brief moment the road rests, reminding us that even vast networks depend upon ordinary places and ordinary people. The Silk Roads now appear more connected than ever before, yet greater unity also means greater interdependence. Every improvement in communication brings new opportunities, while also tying distant communities more closely to one another's fortunes. The Mongol world opened remarkable new possibilities for movement, but every open gate also allows unexpected changes to enter. Prosperity, knowledge, conflict, and disease all travel through the same expanding network of human connection. No empire lasts forever. As political landscapes change, some caravan routes begin to lose importance, while maritime trade grows stronger. The Silk Roads will endure, but they are about to enter another period of transformation. The final document is sealed, and another journey begins before sunrise. Messages continue across the empire, but history is already changing. Even the strongest systems eventually face the passing of time and the arrival of new realities. For a remarkable moment in history, much of Eurasia became more closely connected than ever before. Goods, people, and ideas moved across extraordinary distances, creating opportunities that earlier generations could scarcely have imagined. As centuries passed, political change and growing maritime trade gradually reshaped the old overland networks. The Silk Roads did not disappear overnight, but their role evolved as new routes across the seas gained increasing importance. In the final episode, we will follow the Silk Roads beyond the age of caravans and empires. Together, we will explore how these ancient routes became history, archaeology, memory, and a lasting symbol of human connection that continues to shape the modern imagination. When the roads quieted and the Silk Road became an idea, the last caravan of the season moves quietly across the fading light. No one announces that an era is ending. Like the arrival of winter, great historical changes often come so gradually that people notice them only after they have already begun. A gentle wind passes across the old road. The tracks left by travelers begin to fade, and the watchtower no longer sends messages into the distance. The landscape remembers far more footsteps than the present can still provide. Standing beside the quiet road, one question slowly emerges from the silence. What becomes of a network that once connected much of the known world when the conditions that sustained it began to change? The Silk Roads did not disappear in a single dramatic moment. Instead, they slowly changed shape as politics shifted, maritime trade expanded, and the great rhythms of Eurasian commerce gradually found new directions. The Silk Roads did not disappear in a single dramatic event. Over many generations, the balance slowly shifted as political conditions changed, regional priorities evolved, and different routes gained or lost importance across the vast landscapes of Eurasia. As maritime commerce expanded, ships offered new advantages. They could transport heavier cargo over long distances more efficiently than caravans, allowing coastal ports to become increasingly important in the changing economy of the Old World. Government policies also influenced the Silk Roads. Some dynasties encouraged contact with distant regions, while others limited foreign exchange or shifted their attention elsewhere. The network constantly adapted to changing political priorities. The great caravan cities did not suddenly become empty. People continued farming, trading, and raising families, but the rhythm changed. International caravans became less frequent, and communities gradually turned their attention toward regional commerce rather than distant empires. Imagine returning to a Silk Road town generations later. Life continues much as before. Children still play, farmers still work their fields, and local merchants still trade. What has changed is the rhythm of long-distance exchange that once connected this place to the wider world. Warehouses still serve the community, but their purpose has shifted. Instead of rare goods arriving from distant civilizations, everyday regional products now fill the storage rooms, reflecting an economy that has gradually become more local than global. Trade did not disappear, it simply became more regional. Journeys that once stretched across continents now often ended much sooner, as merchants focused on nearby markets where familiar routes offered greater certainty and lower risk. Time continues moving along after the busiest caravans have passed. Empires rise and disappear, languages evolve, and forgotten towns slowly fade into the landscape. Yet beneath the sand, the traces of earlier centuries patiently wait to be discovered once again. Centuries later, attention returned to places that had once stood at the heart of the Silk Roads. Archaeologists and explorers uncovered forgotten manuscripts, paintings, and settlements, allowing lost voices to speak once more through remarkably preserved evidence. The rediscovery of the library cave transformed historical scholarship. Documents that had rested undisturbed for centuries suddenly offered detailed evidence about trade, religion, administration, and everyday life along the ancient routes. During the 19th century, the phrase Silk Road itself entered modern scholarship. A network that had once existed as countless individual journeys gradually became a powerful historical concept used to describe long-distance connections across Eurasia. The Silk Road gradually became more than history. It entered museums, classrooms, documentaries, and public imagination, reminding new generations that these ancient roots represented one of humanity's greatest traditions of long distance connection. Today, the Silk Road lives not only in history books, but also in museums around the world. Every preserved object tells a small part of a much larger human story that once stretched across continents. The phrase Silk Road has become part of the modern imagination. It helps people visualize ancient connections, even though historians remind us that the reality was always more complex than a single road across a map. The more historians study the evidence, the clearer one lesson becomes. The Silk Roads were never one uninterrupted route. They were a living network of changing paths shaped by geography, politics, climate, and human cooperation. The Silk Roads belonged to no single empire, culture, or century. Their history was created by countless ordinary people whose combined journeys connected distant societies through trade, belief, language, and shared experience. The later history of the Silk Roads is reconstructed from many different forms of evidence: archaeological remains, abandoned caravan stations, and forgotten towns preserve quiet reminders of routes that once linked much of Eurasia. Manuscript collections from places such as Dinhuang and Turfan remain among the richest sources for understanding the Silk Roads. They preserve remarkable details about administration, religion, commerce, and everyday life across many centuries. Historical chronicles from different cultures provide another layer of evidence, yet each reflects the priorities and perspectives of its own authors, reminding us that every historical source must be read with careful attention to context. Scholars continue to debate how dramatic the Silk Road's decline truly was. Some emphasize the growing importance of maritime commerce, while others point out that overland exchange remained meaningful for many regions long after global attention shifted toward the seas. Many historians caution that the phrase Silk Road can be misleading if taken too literally. The ancient network was never one continuous highway, but a changing web of routes shaped by geography, politics, and countless local decisions. The evidence allows both truth and correction. Long distance exchange was undeniably real, yet every new discovery reminds us that simple stories rarely capture the full complexity of how people actually traveled, traded, and communicated. The Silk Roads continue to evolve even after the caravans have gone. Today, archaeologists, historians, linguists, and environmental researchers add new evidence each year, constantly refining our understanding of this remarkable network. History preserves enough evidence for us to understand the broad pattern, but never every detail. Between what survives and what has disappeared lies the space where careful research and thoughtful imagination continue to meet. Modern scholarship increasingly views Central Asia as a center rather than a corridor. Its oasis kingdoms, trading communities, and nomadic societies actively shaped the Silk Roads instead of simply standing between larger civilizations. Historians also remind us that exchange rarely involved goods alone. Every journey carried institutions, artistic traditions, religious ideas, practical skills and human imagination, creating layers of influence that extended far beyond commerce itself. Environmental historians emphasize that climate, water, disease, ecology, and political stability interacted continuously. The Silk Roads succeeded when both natural conditions and human institutions supported long-distance movement at the same time. Without archaeology, much of the Silk Roads would remain only a rumor. The same dry deserts that challenged ancient travelers also preserved extraordinary evidence, allowing modern researchers to reconstruct stories that might otherwise have disappeared forever. Even today, historians cannot reconstruct every route that once crossed Eurasia. Seasonal tracks, local shortcuts, and informal paths often escaped official records, leaving only faint traces beneath the landscape. Most of the people who sustained the Silk Roads remain anonymous. Guides, laborers, translators, families, and craftsmen built this remarkable network through everyday work, even though history preserved very few of their names. We still know very little about how cultural mixing unfolded inside ordinary households. Marriage, friendship, neighborhood life, and daily cooperation shape identities in ways that written records rarely describe in detail. Perhaps the greatest mysteries are the moments that left no record at all. A warning shared beside a well, a kind gesture between strangers, or a quiet decision to turn back may have changed lives forever, even though history never preserved those stories. Now the roads begin to grow quiet. The mountains fade into shadow, the deserts cool beneath the evening sky, and the lights of distant towns slowly disappear. The network remains, but its busiest days have gently passed into history. Somewhere, a caravan leader planned the next journey. Somewhere else, a monk translated unfamiliar words into a new language. And somewhere, a merchant held silk that carried the weight of distant lands. Each quiet moment became part of a much larger human story. What remains today is not only trade, but connection itself. The Silk Roads survived through manuscripts, art, language, archaeology, and shared cultural memory, reminding us that ideas often outlive the journeys that first carried them. As the final footsteps fade into the sand, the journey comes to rest. The roads may have grown quieter, but the connections they created continue to shape the world, reminding us that history often travels farther than the people who first set it in motion. The caravans have gone, yet the landscape still remembers. Across deserts, mountains, and forgotten valleys, the faint paths of the Silk Roads remain as quiet reminders of centuries when distant worlds became connected through ordinary human journeys. What survives is far more than trade alone. Manuscripts, artistic traditions, scientific knowledge, languages, and shared ideas remain as lasting evidence that human curiosity has always traveled farther than political borders. The Silk Roads were never built by a single empire or a single generation. They were created through countless individual choices made by people whose names are mostly forgotten, yet whose journeys quietly shaped the course of human history. The roads can rest now. Their caravans have passed into history, but their legacy continues wherever people exchange ideas, cultures, and knowledge across distance. The Silk Roads were never only about reaching a destination. They were about discovering that the world has always been more connected than it first appears. The dust settles on the ancient trails, and the bustling routes have quieted into a beautiful memory. The Silk Road is no longer just a path, but a peaceful dream fading softly into the sound of the falling rain. If this long journey brought you comfort, gently subscribe to Slumber Lore for more quiet escapes into history. The campfire slowly turns to embers. Rest now, sleep well, and good night.